Yeah, so this is just going to be a pretty casual chat, nothing too intense or crazy. I see a lot of you guys here, and I would love to meet all of you. So we'll try to do that over the coming days. But just for some background, my name is Sharif. I'm the founder of a company called Lexica. We're training generative models. We started with image generation models, and now we're working on a video generation model. I started this company around 3 years ago, and I've been working on it since. Prior to that, I was working on another company called dBuild, where we're working on code generation tools. So I've kind of been like working on AI tools for the past while now. And I think a lot of the advice you're going to get around companies and startups and projects are going to be focused on the kind of tactical, how to grow your usage, how to optimize your SEO, how to like raise your MRR. And I think all of those are really, really important pieces of advice, but I'm not going to be talking about any of that today. I'm going to be kind of talking about the more soft matter in terms of the kinds of things no one really talks about when you're working on a project. And it doesn't really have a title, but I've heard someone refer to it as emotional runway once. And I think that's a really good term to kind of describe what I'll be talking about. So it's pretty clear to most of you, to pretty much everyone, that companies are hard. It's actually very grueling emotionally, physically, mentally to work on a startup, especially an early stage startup, and especially when things aren't working out. And a lot of people kind of assume that if you can kind of just get to that next milestone, things will continue to go well and you'll be happy. But I'm here to tell you that after every single milestone you hit, you won't be happy. You'll keep thinking about the next milestone. And there will always be this kind of hedonic treadmill you're on where you'll never quite be happy with what you're doing. And you'll say, oh, after I hit 1 million ARR, I'll be happy once I hit 2 million ARR. And then you'll hit 2, and then it'll be 4, and then after that it'll be 10, and so on and so forth. This will not lead to a happy life. This is kind of like something I wish I was told a lot earlier on, but I kind of figured it out on my own. So hopefully I can distill all the mistakes and errors I've made into this brief 15, 20-minute talk so that you don't have to do that and you can actually live better lives starting today. Sounds good? All right. So there are two types of runway. There's your bank runway, which is the amount of cash you have or money you have saved up. This is what people talk about when they refer to runway, and it's really important. It's what you use to buy servers, what you use to buy food, what you use to pay for your OpenAI API bills. It's what you use to pretty much do everything. It's how you survive, and you should be tracking this. It's really important. You should know exactly how many months of runway you have left, and your goal should be to try to make this runway last as long as possible. But then there's another type of runway. There's the emotional runway, and no one really talks about the emotional runway because it's really hard to measure. It's kind of nebulous in the sense that no one really knows what it is. On some days, your emotional runway can be into the years, and then the next day it can be down to the weeks, which is really scary because you could be loving what you're working on one day, and then the next, you're like, this is the absolute worst idea I've ever thought of in my entire life. I should just go get a job right now. I'll just open LinkedIn and start applying to jobs. So the highs can be very high, but the lows can also be very low. And I think just acknowledging that in the first place is really important. Just the fact that it exists and that there is an emotional runway is a very important piece of knowledge that you should remember. And there are many things you can do to kind of maximize your emotional runway. And I think for me, there are a few things I've done in the past that have shortened it dramatically, and a few things I've done that have kind of made me endure through the really hard times and kind of lengthened that runway. So I'll start with the things that have shortened it, and these are things you should avoid. I think the quickest way to shorten your emotional runway is to neglect your physical health, specifically neglecting your sleep. If you're neglecting your sleep, you're not going to have any energy the next day. You're going to want to drink a ton of coffee because you don't have any energy, and then you're not going to sleep well that night because you drank a ton of coffee early in the morning. And then this is kind of a vicious cycle where you sleep less and less every week, and things don't go well, and you might be making bad decisions because of your lack of sleep, but you might be telling yourself that this is the only way to be productive. Let me be the first to tell you that it's not. You can actually do things in a much more sustainable way. So the first step is making sure you're sleeping well. Everyone has different sleep hygiene. Everyone has different sleep routines. Focus on measuring your sleep first. You can just use your iPhone or an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch or whatever you have, or even just like log in your notes app how well you think you slept on a scale of like 1 to 3. 1 being pretty bad, 2 being okay, and 3 being amazing. Just measuring it in the first place can actually help you realize that you're not sleeping that well or you're sleeping really well. And it'll help you, what's most importantly, is help you correlate the things you do in a day with how well you sleep that night. So this is the first thing you should do, is make sure you're sleeping well. This is something I've done in the past where I would drink like 4 or 5 Red Bulls a day, sleep awfully, and then like try to counteract that by drinking 6 Red Bulls the next day, and then it just didn't work out. And then you fall into this vicious cycle, and it very much shortens your emotional runway. You feel really sad, you feel depressed, you feel like nothing is working because nothing is working. On the other hand, when you're sleeping well and you're getting consistently good sleep, you have this kind of emotional resiliency, which is really important for building these projects. This emotional resiliency allows you to tackle really hard problems and tackle them in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you hadn't had that kind of sleep barrier protecting you. So I think sleep is the first part to maximizing your emotional runway, is treating it as kind of the number one thing in your life and then everything else second, which is kind of counterintuitive because your company should probably be the first thing in your life, but it shouldn't. It should be sleep. Everything else can come second after that. The darkest times during my time running my company have been times where I neglected my sleep for reasons which I thought were important, but at the time in retrospect, were not that important. If I could go back in time, I would tell myself to just stop working on it, close the computer, go to bed, just get a good night's rest. The next step to maximizing your emotional runway is kind of related to sleep. It's just physical health in general. You want to be exercising a few times a week. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You can figure it out on your own. So the third thing is kind of a bit more tactical, which is you should be working on a project you want to personally see to exist in the world. And what I mean by this is you shouldn't be working on a project because you feel like it's something that's a good company idea and that it's something a VC told you to work on and that they would fund it if you hit like 10K MRR, or that you heard about it in some talk somewhere and someone's saying this is a great idea and you should go and work on it. What you should be working on is something you truly want to see in the world. You should see your companies and your projects as a way of shaping the future in your vision. And the easiest way to do this is simply work on things you wish existed and things you want to use yourself. This is kind of like the worst advice ever because it sounds very, very easy, but it's incredibly hard to follow. And it's very easy to lose yourself in the advice of only build things you personally would want to use. Every time I didn't follow this advice, I ended up wasting years and millions of dollars of money. Every time I followed this advice, I ended up building something millions of people loved using. And it's consistently been the one rule that I have not found violated in any company, my own or my friends or anyone else I know. When they built things they personally wanted to use themselves, everything worked out. And when they focus on building things that they didn't personally care about or didn't want to use, or tricked themselves into thinking that this is something they would want to use, they wasted a lot of time and money and energy and had little to show for it. The easiest way to do this is just be honest with yourself and ask if you would really want to use your product. You should be a consumer of whatever you're working on. You should be the person. You should be in the target audience. If you're not in the target audience, either find a way to get yourself into the target audience or just switch what you're working on and work on something you personally want to use. I'll give you an example. My current company, Lexica, started off as a silly side project where I was in the Stable Diffusion Discord where people were generating thousands and thousands of images per day. And I didn't really know how to write prompts because people were writing these really long paragraphs with many words. And I wasn't sure if there was a science to it. It was just kind of random. So what I did was I scraped the Discord, I put it on a website, and I put a really basic search engine over this website so you could kind of search for different prompts images. And I launched it in about 24 to 48 hours was the first version. Within a week, we had gotten 1 million users to use it. And this was solely because every single feature I'd built for this search engine was something I personally wanted to use as I was generating images. Now, the company I was working on while I was building this, I had spent around 2 years building an AI tool to help companies build internal software to help them kind of run their services by connecting to their databases and so on and so forth. Now, there are many reasons why this didn't grow as quickly, but I think the main one is that I didn't really build it for myself. I wasn't in the target audience of people who wanted to build these kind of internal tools for their companies. Whereas for Lexica, I did care a lot about generating cool images and how to find better prompts and how to write better prompts and helping myself explore kind of what was possible. And I think this was the main difference between these two companies. The first was me building something for someone else. The second was me building solely for myself in the most selfish way possible. And in return, you also build for millions and millions of other people. So by building solely for yourself, you'll quickly realize what matters and what doesn't. You'll quickly realize when your product sucks and when it actually rules. And then you'll quickly be able to get something working that is valuable. And then when you do, just get people to use it, because most people are not that special. And if you build for yourself, you're actually building for hundreds of millions of other people. Yeah, so I think that's the third piece of advice for managing your emotional runway is if you're building for yourself, you kind of always know where the light is, because you kind of know how to use your product. You know where it sucks, and you know what you want to use and what you don't want to use. And knowing that you're building for yourself is really fun because it's clear, it's concise. You know exactly what you should be working on. You know what you shouldn't be working on. Whereas when you're building for other people, it's a bit more nebulous. It's hazy. There's a fog of war on what product features to build and how to market it and how to ship it. When you're building for yourself, you just look at what you do on the internet and then market your product there. You see what kinds of creators and tools that you like to use and then see how they're marketing their products, and then you market it similar to them. You just look at yourself as a possible audience member and figure out what are the types of media I consume and how can I use that to market my product. For me, I was on Twitter a lot, and I just marketed my tool on Twitter, and it turns out people who also wanted to use it were also on Twitter. This works for Reddit, this works for YouTube, this works for Instagram, this works for wherever you think your audience will be, solely by looking at what types of media and websites you consume your kind of entertainment or media on. Whatever you're an audience member for is whatever your marketing channel should be when you're building products for yourself. The fourth piece of advice for managing your emotional runway is working with people you like to work with. And this is really simple, but kind of hard to do in practice. If you have someone who's a fantastic engineer, but they're kind of a very, I would say, let's say they're pessimistic. They will do more to damage your emotional runway than the positives of them being an engineer will do to improve it. So what you should do is only work with people who are optimistic, who you enjoy being around, and who you would probably be willing to spend. There's the airport test, which is, would you be willing to spend like an 8-hour layover in an airport with this person and nothing else? And if you don't want to do that, then you probably shouldn't be working with them every single day. That is probably... These four things are probably the single most important things you can do to improve your odds of success, and they have very little to do with kind of tactical advice around companies. So just to recap, sleep and health is number 1, building for yourself is number 2, and working with people you enjoy is number 3. If you do these 3 things, it's very, very hard for you to go astray. I think if you have all of these things, you're working with people you enjoy on things you personally want to use, and you're maintaining your physical health so that you can be at 100% for as long as possible, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. I'd say you're going to be better than 99% of founders working on their ideas. And that's kind of really it. It's not that complex, but it's very hard to do consistently. And I think if you can do this consistently, you're going to be probably in the upper echelon of founders in terms of people who are aware of what to work on, who to work on it with, and how to maximize their productivity by focusing on their health and keeping that as priority number 1. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, happy to take any questions if anyone has any. Yeah.
So how do you track your kind of like emotions? So sometimes you might just like keep working on stuff and not being able to detect that you have or you are burning out in the process. What is exactly like the tools or the metrics that you use for actually detecting that you are actually burning out and you should take care of yourself?
Yeah, so the question was, what are the kinds of tools and metrics you use to detect whether you're burning out? For me, it's journaling. I journal every single day. I use Obsidian. You can use whatever you want. You can use a notebook. You can use your notes app. I just write a lot every single day. So every day I'll write for about maybe half an hour in the morning and then like half an hour at night. And I have a daily journal going back maybe 5 or 6 years. So it kind of takes the intangible feelings you have in your head and puts it down on paper. And the process of doing that helps you kind of clarify when things are working and when they aren't. And yeah, I would highly recommend writing to everyone here. It helps you kind of process your emotions and help you manage your runway. Yep. Oh, yep.
Yeah, so I have, I guess, 2 questions. Number one is, what is your daily routine in the morning and night? Like, do you meditate in addition to running? And do you just do freestyle journaling, or do you answer some specific questions?
Yeah, I don't really have a consistent routine, but the one thing that I have been doing consistently is just journaling. It's very open-ended. I don't have any set questions. You can probably find like really good starter questions if you just find them on. You can probably find them online, but after you do it for a while, you kind of just figure out what you should write about. Yep. Yep.
What's your take on? I feel like as an entrepreneur, I'm pressured to work 7 days a week. What's your take on working 7 days a week as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I don't work 7 days a week. I just work 5, maybe 6 during crunch periods, but you don't have to work 7 days a week. If anything, I take Sundays very seriously as a day off, where it's kind of like, you know how people try to maximize their productivity? I try to maximize my rest on Sundays, where I'll like intentionally do no work and just like go to the park and walk, maybe like cook a really nice dinner. Yeah, I think it's important to take time off because you start the week fresh with a clear mind. And I think treating Sundays as kind of like the religious day off is like really, really important. For some people, it could be that they can work 7 days a week. I find that I can't. Yep.
For the emotional and productive runway that you mentioned, do you go in with the intention of trying to stretch it and grow and raise that baseline? Or are you trying to keep it steady and consistent?
Yeah, I think trying to grow it and keep it as long as possible is really important. I don't go in actively trying to think of how can I make it as long as possible, but rather, if there's anything obvious that's like threatening its length, I will try to focus on getting rid of that. So if I'm not taking my health seriously, if I'm not sleeping well, if I'm not eating well, those are all things that can severely threaten the length of that runway. And then I'll try to focus on fixing those things. And then there are kind of other things, which is like the people you work on, which is a bit harder to decide on. It takes more time. The people you work with. Yeah, and then the idea as well. So just they kind of all work together, and it's more so that if you kind of treat them all as a system, which it kind of is, you'll end up with a decently long emotional runway. And it's also quite hard to measure because some months it can feel like it's lasting years, and then other months it can feel like it's going to last like a couple of weeks. But your goal is to just maximize the number of days where you feel like it'll last years. Yeah.
So when it comes to actually stagnation, for example, when there are different cases of startups raising pre-seed and then go through this stagnation in terms of MRR, ARR, and then like somehow figuring it out or dying. So in your case, like what would be your suggestion in regards to emotional side of the story, but also to sort of what to do in this kind of case?
Yeah, so the emotional side is kind of, you want to have maximum emotional resiliency here. And what that means is on the Big 5 scale of, I would say, neuroticism, you want to ensure that you have as little neuroticism as possible. And what neuroticism means is just like your inability to handle stressful situations. And your goal as a founder is to try to maximize your ability to handle any stressful situation, because inevitably it's going to be very hard and very stressful. And you want to be sure that you have that kind of resiliency before you even encounter those situations. So being ready for those months or years before they come, or even weeks before they come, is better than being caught blindsided by a really stressful situation and having slept maybe 4 hours a night for the past 2 weeks. So I think preparing ahead of time is the first thing to do there. The second thing is if you're kind of stagnant on what to work on, or the market's kind of stagnant on your product, this is kind of related to product development and marketing. There are 2 sides to building a product, or 2 sides to shipping a product. Is 1, building it. 2 is getting people to hear about it. And I think if you're building solely for yourself and then marketing it through channels which you would frequent yourself, you shouldn't have any issues growing the product, and you shouldn't have any issues getting people to use it. Yeah.
Is it ever worth it to just lock in and sacrifice how you feel?
So I think it is. I'm not saying you should be sleeping 9 hours a night consistently 365 days a year. There oftentimes will be moments where you actually do have to lock in. But here's the nice thing, because if you've been sleeping consistently for the past 2 weeks and you have to pull, let's say you have to go to bed at like 4 a.m. for some reason because your servers crashed, or like you've gotten like a huge new client or something, you have that padding of having slept and treated yourself really well for the past month or so that you can actually take on that kind of lesser sleep night, and you'll be fine, and it works out. The thing is, you don't want to be doing this frequently. You don't want to be doing this consistently. It's kind of a rare occasion that occurs and happens, and I'm not pretending it doesn't, but you should treat it as a rare occasion. Yeah.
How much of the like emotional ups and downs do you share with your team? You like keep it pretty siloed to yourself, or do you share like, hey, this is not going well?
That's a really, really good question. How much of the emotional ups and downs do you share with your team? It depends on your team size. It depends on how much you want to kind of keep them in the loop, and it also depends on kind of your own personal emotional resiliency. For some people, they find that they're capable of just managing their emotions really, really well, and they can kind of just not offload that to anyone else. For others, they actually find great relief in kind of offloading that to the team, and the team kind of helps balance that weight. And I think generally speaking, it's better to kind of keep everyone in the loop and kind of get everyone to be on the same page of what to do and like how things are going. I think bottling it up may work for some people, but I find that it doesn't work that well for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, going along with the analogy of emotional runway compared to like financial runway, would you say there's a similar analogy with like liftoff? Because we're all searching for financial liftoff. Do you think there's like an emotional liftoff that you've reached?
Do you mean when you're like profitable, your runway is kind of infinite? Oh, so you're asking if there's an analog where your emotional runway becomes infinite? That's a good question. Yeah, so when you're profitable, your financial runway is infinite, but is there ever a point in which your emotional runway becomes infinite? I don't think there's a clear analog there. That's kind of where the analogy breaks down, because you can be doing quite well, you could be having an infinite runway, your company could be profitable, but a lot of the times when companies fail, it's not the financial runway, it's the emotional runway, and it's a lot harder to manage. If anything, the only time a company ever fails is only because of the emotional runway and never because of the financial runway. And you can think of this as when a company runs out of money and the founder still really cares about the problem and wants to work on it, they will find a way to make it work. They'll like work nights and weekends. They'll work on their project nights and weekends while they have a full-time job. They'll like shut the company down and start another company doing the exact same thing. Whereas you can have a ton of money in the bank and then kind of run out of your emotional runway and burn it out. And no amount of money will save you from that. So I don't think they're like exact analogs, but they are similar in the sense that there are kind of durations you want to maintain and maximize, and that's kind of about where the similarity goes. Yeah.
How do you manage like personal relationships, family, all that kind of stuff?
Like personally?
Yes, personally, with running your company. Because if you typically work, like if all you think about is work and you're building your company, yeah, mixed in and you neglect.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was a bit younger, I focused solely on my company and nothing else. I kind of thought that I have done nothing and I need to prove myself to the world. And the way I do that is by building a really, really great company. And that once I do that, people will realize how important I am and how great I can be. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that's not the case. You have to treat your friends and your family and your relationships with respect. And if anything, they should go before your company. There are times where you will have to sacrifice spending time with your friends and family for your company, and then there are also times where you should stop working on your company and spend time with your friends and family. And I think as I've gotten older, the ratio of company time to personal time has shifted from being predominantly company time to being roughly 50-50 company time. And I imagine as I get older, it'll be more towards spending less on my company and more on my personal relationships. But yeah, don't feel like you have anything to prove to people. And yeah, focus on your relationships early, because when you get older, they'll kind of wish you've done it sooner. Yes?
So building for yourself is great, but I find it's like maybe 10% of the work. Because I don't have to take my own, I don't have to onboard myself. I don't have to take my own credit card. Because a lot of things that come with building this stuff is not exciting to me, even though the product I want to use. So if 50% to 90% of the work is for other people, how do you manage like getting the excitement going for those other aspects that you don't actually need for if you're just going to use a product yourself?
Oh, so do you mean you have an idea which is something you're working on for yourself, and you find that there's a lot of drudgery in kind of getting it to work for other people? I see. Yeah, this is kind of it's kind of annoying when you have a product you want to use and you can kind of just keep it running on localhost and then it just works for yourself. This is where the whole like building a company thing comes into play, where if it were just a side project for yourself, that'd be finished, but because you have to deploy it and you have to get people to pay for it and you have to charge people and manage accounts and do customer support, that is kind of like the annoying hard part of running this whole company or like starting a product. Yeah, it's necessary drudgery. I don't think there's a way around it. I think knowing that it's a product that you want to use and you want other people to use makes it a lot easier, versus doing this for, the alternative is working at a company and doing it for another product which you don't really care about, for consumers or customers you don't really care about. So even though it is hard, it is probably better than the alternative, which is doing it for something you don't care about much for customers you don't care about. Cool. Yep.
Have you ever just like felt like you are at the end of your kind of runway and you want just like to abandon the ship or something?
Yes, often. I mean, very often. Like everyone feels this very, very often, even if they don't talk about it. And it's not a. Oh yeah, the question is: you ever feel like you're at the end of your emotional runway and you want to abandon ship? Most successful startup founders have felt like this multiple times for very, very long durations. And that's just kind of the reality is we're not perfect, and it's hard to do things for a really long time without positive external feedback. And that's kind of what a company is you're doing a lot of really hard things without much external validation or feedback. When you're feeling like that, I think the easiest thing to do is follow your curiosity and do things that excite you. If you're excited by what you're working on, it's very hard to lose the motivation to work on it. If it's novel and new and you're kind of inspired by novel and new things, that helps a lot too. So if you're working on something, try to make it unique and interesting and something no one's done before. That helps a lot. And then another thing is like working with your friends matters too, because you can kind of offload that burden to them as well. So if someone's really excited about something one week and then you're not, it's kind of hard to like completely ignore their excitement. You kind of like through like reverse osmosis get some of their excitement, and it kind of helps you a bit. So that's where like working with people you enjoy spending time with comes into play. But yeah, I mean, there are times where you just feel like things aren't working out, and like that's fine, that's okay. You just have to trust that eventually things will work out and that you will get through it.